Good afternoon. If you would like to welcome today's panelists for this panel on trade war, if you could join me in welcoming to the stage Robert Habeck, the Vice Chancellor of Germany and Federal Minister for the Economy and Climate Action. We have Minister Mélanie Joly, the Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister. We have Commissioner Maroš Šefèoviè from the European Commission, Executive Vice President. We have Ambassador John Huntsman, former governor. And we have Senator Andy Kim from the United States. Fantastic. Look, tariffs are very much suddenly in the news. In the last 26 days, I think we've seen the word tariff used more on the front pages of newspapers than almost ever before. It's 26 days since the inauguration of the new president in the United States. And in those 25 days, we've seen the announcement of a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico and China. We've seen 10% tariffs applied to China. We've seen a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, or aluminium, where I come from, with no exemptions. We've seen a plan launched for reciprocal tariffs from the United States, tariffs on automobiles from the 2nd of April, and reviews into whether further tariffs should occur to countries unfairly taxing US companies. That's a lot of talk about tariffs. Now, we all know that for the new president in the United States, tariffs are both an expression of the injustice that he feels the United States suffers as other countries take advantage of its more open economy, as he sees it, as well as, in his words, a great lever to get a better deal from other countries. And he's not entirely wrong on both of those. If you take the case of India, with average trade-weighted tariffs of 12%, while the US has 2.2%, it does look unfair to some in the US. And the announcement of his tariffs has led to a rapid negotiation where India has agreed to slash duties on everything from Harley-Davidson motorcycles onwards, and also agreed to start importing more US oil and gas. The European Union, and we'll hear more about it, is thinking about reducing car tariffs and also about the supply of oil and gas to Europe from the United States. So what I'd like us to look at today with this brilliant panel is how serious is this, and how is it that other countries should respond to it? And I'd like to start with you, Robert, Vice Chancellor of Germany, Federal Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. You've got a big portfolio. You've got an election coming up very soon. I'm sure we're all wishing you luck with the election. But this, you're sitting in a Munich Security Conference where, frankly, we're all staggering from one existential deep dive crisis to the next. Whether it's the existential crisis of AI becoming within 2 or 3 years out of human control, whether it's China, whether it's US unilateral action, whether it's Russia, war and conflict, it does feel dizzying, and it feels as though climate and the acceleration towards the tipping point is now lost in all of that. Could you put it in context for us and tell us, does the tariff war matter?
I understand your question, but actually it does not make me feel dizzy, because from my reading, there's a story behind all the different stories that you mentioned, and that could explain the real struggle of our time. And you're right, this is kind of like a dark Munich Security Conference, similar to, we discussed it briefly when we were behind the scenes, similar to the 2022 conference that was just a week or so before Russia's aggression on Ukraine. And like that, everyone at least get a sense of urgency that it could happen, and now, in a way, it's happening also now here on this Munich Security Conference. My reading of all the different aspects is that we are living in times where autocracies are trying to push liberal democracies, individual rights, and the freedom back again. See, what is climate action all about? It's not about climate. It's about protection of freedom of the coming generations, and I would say due to the extreme weather outcomes now in our time. What is the war in Ukraine about? It's not about only territory in Donbass. It's about not giving the Ukrainians the right for free choice of their own fate, becoming part of the European Union. What is the aggressive market action really about? It's about not having rules-based order. So you see, the story behind all the different problems, including climate action, is that unlimited power stands against a rules-based system, a freedom order, peace order in Europe, a democratic order in liberal democracies, and that the powerful has not unlimited access to power. That is what democracies are really about, and therefore I have to say that the speech of Vance yesterday has made one big mistake, and that was, I quote from my mind, that the will of the people decides in democracy. But the liberal democracies that we built, and actually the Americans built in the past decades, is that rules-based order, that constitutional system is limiting power. And that is under attack. From climate action to the war in Ukraine to what we are seeing now and the rise of right-wing populistic parties in our liberal democracies. They all have one sense, one common sense. They want to have unlimited power. And that is the story behind all the different problems we are facing from my point of view. And therefore, this security conference is really at the heart of the debate.
Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor. So for you, the essence is unilateral action by the United States, and the tariffs are just one instance of that.
That is what they're saying. And as a European and a German politician, I have to say the wrong answer would be that we would answer from America first, with Germany first, or Canada first, or France first. We need to unite. So it's Europe united. That is the right answer to these national nations first. And then, of course, we have to cooperate as the liberal democracies to defend a system where conflicts are solved by dialogue, by consent, but this is under attack, and of course this means that we have to strengthen our back and not lay back, and especially as Europeans we have to focus on our own strength, and focus means not saying the 10th time, oh no, this is the wake-up call. I mean, the wake-up call was 3 years ago, and it was actually 10 years ago, and Donald Trump first was there. We don't need any wake-up calls. We need now action in all kinds that are in all fields that are necessary to prove that liberal democracies are capable of solving their own problems and increasing economic growth and having their own techniques and not relying on Elon Musk all the time.
Brilliant. So hang together, not separately. Minister Mélanie Joly, you were nodding vigorously as Robert Habeck said that. As Canadian Foreign Minister, you have been right at the front line, the first to be challenged with 25% tariffs. How are you is Canada getting the support from other countries to give life to this vision that Vice Chancellor Habeck is telling us, like hold together, be collective, or not?
Well, I think that everybody is shocked that Canada is going through that right now. But at the same time, I think that, just to give a bit of context to everyone here, we're the closest friend and the best ally of the United States, period. The best neighbor they could ever have, 5,000 kilometers of undefended border, a very secure and strong border. And we are the biggest client of the United States. We buy from the US more than China, Japan, France, and the UK combined. There are millions of jobs in the US and, of course, in Canada that are linked. We are extremely integrated in terms of our own economy. And we provide a lot of energy to the US. Oil and gas, fertilizers, so potash, uranium for their nuclear sites, hydroelectricity, and of course, everything linked to uranium. So I've said uranium, potash, and hydroelectricity and oil and gas. So ultimately, there is an interdependency between the US and Canada. But when we hear 25% tariffs, it's an existential threat, because this would account on hundreds of thousands of jobs in Canada being lost and higher unemployment rate coming from our best friend and best ally. So we have experience dealing with President Trump. We went through the renegotiation of NAFTA, which is called the USMCA. What we know is when President Trump talks, you have to listen, and you have to make sure that you are abiding by what he's saying, in the sense that you have to take him seriously. But what President Trump respects is strength. So from the moment that we were imposed 25% tariffs based on the fact that there was a fentanyl crisis in the US coming from Canada, let's go back on facts, 1% of fentanyl in the US comes from Canada, 1% of illegal migrants in the US come from Canada. So we had a very strong border plan. We made sure to engage with the Trump administration. We presented how we would make sure that the border would be secure. We had many allies in the Republican Party, many allies, of course, with the Democrats. And ultimately, what made a big, big change is when we said, you know what? $155 billion worth of tariffs against the US. And you saw the US markets tanking, and you saw also potentially the price of gas going up. So my point to all of you is we're the canary in the coal mine. If the US administration is doing that to Canada, you're next. And we need to work together on this. And what I saw when it comes to, you were talking about the rise of populism, and I think our people in Canada reacted so strongly to the fact that we were so strong. My party used to be 25% back in the polls. Within a week, we're nearly at par with the opposition. Because Canadians are afraid, are anxious, and love the fact that we're standing strong. So,
and Minister, could I ask you,
yes.
is your assumption that in 30 days, the issue will have disappeared? Or
Nope.
do you think in 30 days there'll be another demand with the same threat? After all, it is just a sort of stay of execution at the moment.
So we're dealing with 3 executive orders. You mentioned the first one being linked to fentanyl and the border, and it's us and Mexico. You've mentioned also the one on aluminum and steel. And this is about great American steel workers. This is about great Canadian steel workers. We're linked. We're integrated. If they put tariffs on them, on our exports, basically, they're affecting jobs in the US. Mm-hmm. And we have Chinese, tariffs on China. We don't accept any form of dumping from China neither. So I think that so that's the second executive order. And the third one is the April 1st delay on the executive order that was signed on Inauguration Day, which is about studying the entire trade relationship the US has with every single trade partner. There are 500 public servants in Washington working on this right now.
And what do you need other countries to do? You're sitting in the heart of Europe today.
Yeah.
What is it that you need the EU to do?
We need to coordinate.
Okay.
We presented already a first list of $30 billion worth of tariffs. We need to make sure that we work together, because ultimately none of us will change the perception of President Trump. The only people in the world that will make sure that tariffs are not imposed are American people themselves. And when they understand that this is affecting the gas, at the pump, or when they understand that it's ultimately much more costly at the grocery store, they'll say enough. So that's why we need to work together to make sure ultimately that I think our arguments prevail.
Thank you so much, Minister. And we're going to get that US perspective in just a moment. But first, I would like to come to Maroš Šefèoviè, the first Vice President of the European Commission. This morning, Mario Draghi wrote in the FT that this is a wake-up call. Yes, I'm sorry, Vice Chancellor. He did use the words wake-up call to Europe. His point was that the internal barriers within the European Union, the IMF calculates, are equivalent to a 45% tariff within the European Union. So in a way, his message is, we've got to, as Europeans, we've got to get out of our own way before we blame the US for tariffs. Is he right, or is he missing something? And what's going to make the difference now? What's your most optimistic scenario for Europe in this period of huge Euro pessimism?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that it's very interesting from the academic perspective, but I think whatever our discussion on the single market in the European Union is, there is, I would say, absolutely no reason whatsoever to go after us with 25% tariffs on the steel and aluminium, to put into the danger what is the most massive, biggest trade relationship on this planet, 1.6 trillion euros of trade turnover every year, 4 billion of goods and services flying over the Atlantic every single day. The fact that Europeans from their pension funds and saving accounts are sponsoring scales-up startups, NASDAQ companies to the tune of 300 billion in the United States. And to kind of put it under the question mark because of trade deficit, which we calculate goods and services is somewhere in the realm of 50 billion, 3% of our turnover. And our trade relationship is so massive that if we start to tinker with it, it would have clearly negative impact on the whole world. It will bring the negative consequences, I would say, for the whole planet. And as also our president said yesterday, I mean, the tariffs are taxes on Americans. They are making, I would say, their life worse off. It costs more to get the goods into the supermarket. It has negative impact on the inflation. And I think that even President Trump acknowledged that the tariffs might be painful, I think he said at the beginning. So I am asking my American partners, why do we have to go through this pain? If there are other issues on the table, let's sit together, let's resolve it. If the 50 billion is a problem, if the cars are the problem, if the soybeans are the problem, if the LNG is the problem, anything you want to discuss, we are ready to discuss it, because we believe that as a closest allies, and I agree with our Canadian minister that Canadians and Europeans are the best allies Americans have, and I think it's very important in this fragmented world which we are discussing yesterday, today, and I'm sure tomorrow. So why to go through this I would say very, very complex process which would lead to the increased tension? And coming to the Mario Draghi, as you know, he presented rather dense report about the flaws, shortcomings, and where we should put the European focus on, and we are absolutely on it. So, I mean, you would, and I believe that Robert would agree with me, the word competitiveness was never more often used in any of the European documents and conclusions than it is right now. And I was presenting on Tuesday the work program of the Commission for the next year, where I would say the even bigger part than what we want to do was about what we want to simplify, how we want to cut the red tape, how we want to make sure that we will not bring such administrative burden on our farmers, on our industrialists. And you are right that if it comes to the barriers on the internal market, we had very difficult choices to make over the last 5 years. We had a COVID. We had the war, and we still have a war in Ukraine, and we had energy crisis. And we had to be almost in permanent emergency mode. And we wanted our member states to do a lot. But we didn't want to combine this emergency and urgency mode with running after them with the infringements, with pushing them into the very difficult situation because it was tough for everyone. But we realized that we need to reinvigorate our single market. Indeed, there are still a lot of barriers which we can and we should get rid of. We still, with Robert, we had many discussions about the bottlenecks on interconnectors if it comes to the electricity, which is kind of preventing us for better sharing of the renewable energy. We still have, of course, a lot of bottlenecks on our gas networks and so on and so forth. So it's really a lot of things to work on. But we know about that. We work on it. And I don't think that any threat on the external tariffs against Europe would help us to start or accelerate our internal reforms, which we know we have to do.
So what will? If the robust unilateralism from across the Atlantic isn't helping you, as first Executive Vice President, move on that, what do you think will? Because normal times don't seem to be working.
I think that we clearly got the message, I mean, from our businesses and from our citizens than the last year. We see that we are lagging behind the United States if it comes to the productivity, to the efficiency. We are spending almost the same amount of money if it comes to the basic research, but we are very poor in startups, in scale-ups, and sometimes, you know, also our competition policy was kind of oriented to the situation which was there 5 to 10 years ago. So we have to really look at some of, I would say, the fundamental rules in the European Union to adjust it to the new reality, and we are absolutely conscious of that. And Robert would be the best witness here, because every single discussion of the economic ministers or the finance ministers is about competitiveness. We are getting a lot of pressure from our member states, from our economic stakeholders to reform, reduce administrative burden, be more flexible. And I know all the abbreviation, all these most cumbersome rules and regulations we put into our books by heart, and we recognize that we need to deliver on dramatically simplifying the way how we do business in the European Union.
Thank you so much, Executive Vice President. Senator Andy Kim, another Oxford graduate. There's 3 on this stage, I'm not being, you know, Oxford centered or anything. Senator Kim, the steel and aluminium tariffs last time caused several American businesses to go out of business. I remember reading the story of a Missouri nail maker who had to lay off, and it's what Minister Joly was saying about the steel and aluminium tariffs affecting America. What are you saying to your voters about this economic period and this approach to trying to wrangle better relationships with other countries?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it, and I'm very happy to be on this panel led by my former teacher at Oxford. But what I will say here is that this is something that is both a political and a policy challenge before us. And I think you're right to frame the question that you are, just in terms of where the American people are at, because I think that this is a place where Trump is trying to make it seem like a strength, but actually it's perhaps his biggest vulnerability here. It's very much a potential Achilles heel. Remember, he sold this to the American people saying that he will have the tariffs paid for by other people, not the American people. And that's the promise. It's very much kind of this, you know, we'll make Mexico pay for the border wall, right? And so the challenge that he faces is a political and a policy problem. In his administration, there certainly are people that believe that this is the right policy, that this is the right approach for the United States to take a more protectionist, isolationist approach going forward. But there isn't consensus. I don't want you to think that there's consensus within the Trump administration about that. Most importantly, at the very top with the president and the vice president, whether it is these policies on tariffs or whether it's a speech here on the stage, they are not talking to you. That is, you are not the audience. They are talking to their base. They are talking to the Make America Great Again MAGA base. And they're trying to show this as a source of strength. The reason why is because 73% of Republicans or Republican-leaning Americans believe that Americans lose more than they gain when it comes to international trade. Now, there's a challenge, though, is because from this political standpoint, there's that, as I said, a vulnerability here. So, for instance, right now, as Americans see what Trump is doing, you know, right now his approval rating is actually higher than it's ever been for him. But when it comes to the question of, is Trump doing enough on inflation and high costs, 66% of Americans right now are saying he is not doing enough. And when asked directly about tariffs, will tariffs raise prices or lower prices, 64% of Americans believe that it will raise prices on them. Only 14% believe it will lower prices. When asked about tariffs upon European nations, 60% of Americans disapprove of that. So I just raise that as saying this is a particular moment where it's important to understand the distinction between politics and policy. And as this moves forward, I urge you all to think about this. First and foremost, ensure that you do not think about this as a Washington consensus or a Trump administration consensus. Number two, as that April 1st deadline rises and gets closer, and I think that's very important for you all remember that April 1st deadline for the reports to come back to Trump. To understand that your position, I think I advise you as you're thinking about this is something we think about, is do not try to embrace the status quo and protect the status quo. There should be an understanding that, look, some reforms or some changes are very much something to be considered. But then the third point is really try to articulate the harms that it will do, not just to your people, but to the American people, especially when it comes to manufacturing and supply chains. Understand the vulnerabilities that are out there and understand that the person who will ultimately make the decision about this, he's not ideological about this. He's not thinking about it from a policy standpoint, though some in his administration are. He's thinking about a political stance. And that political stance is deeply unpopular amongst the American people, and it is perhaps an extraordinary vulnerability on his part.
That's super useful. Thank you for that. So pointing to the cracks within the United States that other countries need to think about as they frame their reaction. So let me come now to Ambassador John Huntsman. I think the only ever American ambassador that served both in Russia and in China, not at the same time, by the way. But you've also been governor of Utah. What's your advice, picking up on what Senator Kim was just saying about how the other countries that are represented in this room should play this administration? It looks very unconventional to us, this administration. Do you agree with that? And how should other countries deal with it?
Well, thank you. Far be it for me to decipher the indecipherable, but I will try. We should have had this hearing next door in the bar because this lends itself very well to heavy drinking. I will just submit that at the outset. It's great to be with Senator Kim, our newly elected outstanding senator from New Jersey. Let's just remember that a lot of the discontent around globalization has been lingering for a long time. I felt as governor in my state. And trade really starts at the most fundamental of local and grassroots levels. We're all kind of looking at the top line trade policy, Washington style, but the United States is made up of 50 individual sovereign entities, all with their own constitutions, legislatures, and way of doing business. And many of them are going to keep trading as they've always traded. And I suspect we're going to be here 4 years from now, and we'll sit down with the great foreign minister of Canada, and they'll still be a great ally, friend, and trading partner, is my guess. So let's take away the performative and hyperbolic aspects of politics, and let's look at the policy side. So who is Trump? Trump is a real estate developer tycoon from New York City, whose modus operandi is typically shouting out a deal, audacious though it might be, and looking for people to make a counteroffer. So the old conventions of making trade policy speeches at the Brookings Institution or the Munich Security Conference, those days are gone. And here are the days where on Air Force One you utter your trade policy, which is the simplest and most confounding trade policy I've ever heard in my life. If you charge us, we will charge you. It doesn't take 100 pages to write that, but there you have it. So I think the broader question is, will participants here representing some of the great countries of the world, and I really am honored to be here with you, kind of look at the reality, which is, in many cases, there are long-standing solid trading relationships. In some cases, there are imbalances. And what Trump is looking at is a very kind of simple view of imbalances being a result of unfair trade practices. So the key here, I think, and listen, don't take my words to the bank. I'm just giving you a gut response to all of this, which is put an offer on the table. Do a deal, negotiate something. That's kind of his style, and chances are you're going to find something that makes sense for the time being. But trade policy right now is not going to be driven by the U.S. Trade Representative's office, because the whole organization has been changed such that it now reports up through the Commerce Department, which traditionally has never done trade policy. It does trade promotion. So where is trade policy going to come from? I suspect it's going to come from Trump himself, who likes to engage in person-to-person relationship and diplomacy. And he will cut deals one-off in that fashion. The broader issue that I'm concerned about is, so what happens to the rules of the road more broadly? What happens, I represent Mastercard. We have 3.5 billion customers in 210 countries of the world. We are absolutely reliant on interconnectivity and trade flows. What we have not seen, and what needs to happen, is some updated version of digital trade, the protection of intellectual property, storage of data, on and on and on. So what's going to happen in this void of trade policy making? I suspect we're going to see regions of the world begin to take the lead. I'm talking about ASEAN. I mean, even now, the 10 nation states of ASEAN are working on a data facilitation agreement. That could set a standard for the world. They're working on things in the GCC. India's working on a connective route to the Middle East. There are all kinds of innovative things that are taking place in the world today. So my guess is, in this interregnum, this void of trade policy and kind of one-off deal-making, we're going to see a lot of regionalization. And out of regionalization will likely come some interesting thinking that will lead probably to some future solutions on broader trade policy issues.
That's brilliant. So a vision of a world that will continue to cooperate, but actually work around the United States instead of through it all the time. Robert Habeck, I know you have to go in a moment, but I'd love to hear. Oh, then I was misinformed.
Then, I don't have to go.
Okay. Then,
do I?
Then
they say I have to go.
Oh,
I don't
you do?
know.
Well, then...
Funny things are happening in my life.
Audience...
Should I stay or should I...
Please decide your questions.
Rock the cash bar.
I'm going to come straight to you for questions, but I'm not sure that you know whether you have to come or go. But just in case you do have to go and you're about to be dragged off stage, just picking up on what Ambassador Huntsman said, what's the deal you would put on the table for President Trump? Because going on your first comments, it sounded like you stay out of our politics and we'll stay out of yours. Is that the deal you'd put?
Well, that is obvious, necessary. I would say the imperative is, as to us, the Germans, the Europeans, stop whining, start acting. And acting means acting, not discussing. Let me give you some examples, listening to what the governor just said. Of course, we have to do trade with other partners, as we can't rely on what's happening now with China. So let's do it. And that means not taking 20 years' time for free trade agreements, but focusing on the things that are easy to solve. For example, Maroš, we discussed it with India. I mean, the problem is always in free trade agreements agriculture. Even CETA was the most important thing was fishery. But then let's start with industries and then work together with industries and maybe digitalization. And we will never come to a European agreement with India when we talk about the mood of holding chickens. This is impossible, but skip that and be pragmatic and do that. The second thing Ursula von der Leyen yesterday solved, I would say, the fiscal structure plan, the European fiscal structure plan, is too tight, lose it. It's done now. That is very pragmatic. The third thing, maybe listening to the debate in the conference, of course, Europe has to do more for its military capacities. How should we do that? The normal way would be either the nations would use their agencies built up in decades now, and as Jens Stoltenberg sitting there, they are not the most effective agencies I've ever seen, or we are building a European agency, which takes also ages maybe. There is the European Contact Group, and that is an efficient group. These are smart guys, and they have proven in the last 3 years that they can make decisions very, very fast. Use this group and not building an agency. Then, what should I say? When it comes to military questions, or maybe our own capacities, you know that we have in Europe divided civilian research and military research very, very thoroughly. That's not of any sense. I mean, how could we ask for more defense and ammunition for Ukraine and say, but this is the dark side of industries? That does not make any sense. So use it and bring full force into innovation, and then we hopefully in the next 3 years we create our own satellite system, rocket system, but also security systems. And
fantastic. Now,
you see what I mean?
I do. So there's a deal to the US.
Not writing a legislative act,
right,
but making it happen in reality.
Fantastic. So it's a deal to the US that says we'll get our act together on these different things. We've got with 4 minutes and 43 seconds to go. I'm going to take 3 questions, then I'm going to come to each panelist for a one-line answer to all the problems of the world, or to your questions. So your questions. There were a couple of hands. Yes, the lady in red jacket. Yep. Just very quick questions.
I leave you alone.
A question to Senator Kim and Governor Huntsman. We've seen the president use emergency provisions to push his trade policy, at least on the Canadian and Mexican piece, which gave the Canadians and Mexicans some leeway. Now, in the reciprocal trade piece, it's going to go back to regular trade policy. So in this sort of ricocheting effect of what's permanent and what's not permanent, what would your advice be to the Europeans that are listening here? Are we going to see more of this emergency strong muscling, or are we going to see a return to regular Section 232, 301 type U.S. trade policy that could make things arguably more predictable? And I see the Canadian Foreign Minister shaking her head.
Fantastic. Another question over here.
Thank you. Tobias Ellwood, former Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom. A dark mood was mentioned here. I've been coming here to the Security Conference, I thought many of us, for many, many years, never knowing an atmosphere like this ever before. Mm-hmm. Would the panel agree that there is a developing and real void between America's thinking and European thinking when it comes to European security? And if that is not addressed, it'll only go to help our adversaries.
Thank you, Tobias. And one more question. Yes, here. This gentleman right here.
Thank you very much. The session is also very much about breaking down barriers in Europe. But let's not forget, we've also already had a backlash against free trade in Europe. We had Take Back Control in the UK. What is your agenda to address that backlash? I think that's vital. Also because for citizens, we live in an age of enormous insecurity. Inflation, flexibilization, globalization adds to that. So I think if you want to have an agenda to break down barriers, you also need an agenda to create security and create income security. So what is your agenda if you want to have a free trade agenda to address that backlash in Europe as well?
Great. So we've got which kinds of tariffs is Europe likely to face? Is this the darkest moment in bilateral relations with the US? And how do we sell tariffs internally? I'm going to come to each of you panelists just for a final statement. Minister Joly.
Yes. So, Ambassador, when it comes to how to deal with President Trump, what I would say is you don't start by presenting what you want in a deal. I think that you have to present your stance, and then it will end up to a deal. And President Trump is the only one who will cut that deal. Nobody else in his administration. But why I say that is I see a lot of my European colleagues that are thinking that, you know, they come up with their proposal, or sometimes they divide each other. That's not how it works, guys. This is about strength and courage. And then, once he respects you, then you're able to cut a deal. That's how I see it, and that's our own experience. And yes, you can get to a place where actually it's a win-win. And yes, you can get to a place of respect. But President Trump right now is governing through executive orders. He will continue. He will use a lot of different opportunities to do that. And it will be linked to a lot of national security and the fact of ultimately being able to have the power to impose tariffs. Because when you think about it, technically trade is under the legislative branch, not the executive powers. But he will continue to use national emergency issues as a way to make sure that he can continue to put tariffs on different countries.
Thank you very much. Maroš Šefèoviè.
Yeah. I will just address the free trade agreements agenda. I have to say that the energy being radiated from US, this strong aim to erect new barriers, to increase the tariffs on all partners around the globe, like created, I would say, new momentum in the global trade. I can tell you that since November last year, there is enormous interest in striking the deals with the European Union. We concluded our negotiations with Mercosur. We managed to find a solution with our friends from Switzerland after quite some time. The whole Christmas and the New Year, we've been negotiating with Mexico. And over the last 2 weeks, we are working weekends, all the holidays, because there is enormous demand of accelerating our negotiations. So in few days, the whole college is flying to India, because we want to advance our negotiations in that regard. We relaunched and reinvigorated our negotiations with Malaysia. We want to close the deal with Indonesia before summer. We are working very intensively with Philippines, and practically all GCC countries approach us that they want to accelerate the talks. So I think that everyone feels that what you need in this fragmented world is a stability, predictability, serious partner, and that Europe is all of that, because we respect the deals, we are rule of law-based society, and we treasure and value our partners. And my argument to the members of the European Parliament or members of the national parliament when we discuss the free trade agreement is, show me one which led to the decrease of the trade or to some problems on any of the sides of the partnership we are striking through the trade deals. There is not one single agreement which would point into that direction. We had a huge discussion, and Minister knows, about CETA. Just look at the numbers. It's a roaring success for the both sides, and therefore we want to project also in the future. We are free and fair traders. We want to dismantle the barriers, and we want to have the fair relationship with our partners.
Thank you so much, Maroš Šefèoviè. Andy Kim.
Yeah, I'll be brief here, but to the first question about tariffs, I guess what I'd just like to remind everyone is, there's no doubt going to be challenges and chaos over the next 4 years, but we are meeting less than a month into this administration. This is a particular phase of any presidency. These are the set plays that we're seeing. These are the plays that they had, written in Project 2025. We knew that they were coming. At some point, this administration is going to have to work with Congress in terms of government funding and any number of other issues. And that's another phase in the life cycle of a presidency, and things will be exceedingly more difficult. It's the narrowest margin in the House of Representatives since the Great Depression. They can only afford one vote loss right now, and we've seen how they've been challenged to be able to govern and legislate in that capacity. So when it comes to the tariffs, I imagine they will try to do as much through emergency powers because they can avoid Congress in that way. But in the places where it will go to Congress, you will see a very different type of approach, not just on tariffs, but writ large. And that just gets to the last point that I just want to make, which is about the mood here and that effort there. Again, I hope you take away, there is not a Washington consensus. There is not even consensus within the Republican Party or within the Trump administration on what comes next. And there are a number of us that are working not only to try to navigate this and respect our allies and our partners and our transatlantic bond on that front, but we are working actively to try to think through how we make sure we restore and rebuild after these 4 years.
Thank you, Senator Kim. John Huntsman.
I'll just say real quick, as Senator Kim said, there are patterns to newly elected presidents. So I ran for president but lost, so I never got a chance to try. But there are executive orders, a flurry of them, that is typical because you want to show your constituents that you are responding immediately to your campaign promises. And then the regularity of governance takes over and the people get on the playing field. We have very few people on the playing field right now. So for the forensic scientists in the audience, you have an opportunity to go back to term one to look at the executive orders and then look at the action that took place after that. I think that's very instructive because these patterns repeat themselves. And politics generally happens in patterns. And to Senator Kim's point, there's a thing called a midterm election coming up in less than 2 years. Very tight balance in the House of Representatives, only up by 4, I think it is, in the Senate. And the regularity of good governance and predictability and delivering things for the constituencies that elected Trump, that will have to be a part of the later part of the 2-year period, or you're going to get swamped during the midterms. So I think that's going to be a calculus as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm getting the big signal. That was brilliant. What have we learned today? Just 3 very quick takeaways, I think. The first being the obvious, as the world is throwing a little bit off its balance, stay calm, analyze your interests, and call other countries and talk to them. Second is strengthen relations, as Ambassador Huntsman and others have said, with other countries, with other regions. There's a silver lining here about tighter cooperation both within the European Union and across the world with other regions and countries. And third, and I think this comes to the essence of why we're all here in Munich at the Security Conference, which is let's try to close the gap in understanding. And both Andy Kim and John Huntsman have helped us in that, and it's been a plea from Minister Joly. Instead of being affronted by the words of J.D. Vance, look into the nuance. Look into the nuances of the very many Americas that exist. Even in Mar-a-Lago, there are warring and different Americas. And think about which America you're speaking to as you speak to them. So with huge thanks to the brilliant panelists today and to the Munich Security Conference for this panel, join me in thanking the panelists. Thank you very much.